guys, welcome back to my channel, and today we are going to be going through a book rec for not all but a good chunk of the romance book tropes. So for our first book and first trope recommendation, we have The Soulmate Equation by Christina Lauren. This is the most underrated Christina Lauren book ever, in my opinion. I read this one after Love in Other Words, and I honestly love it more than Love in Other Words. But this is a fake dating trope, and it goes along with Jess and Dr. River Pena, who is like the creator of this like genetic dating app, because he's like super, like, I don't even know how I would describe him. He's like kind of, he's not grumpy. This is not a grumpy sunshine. He's very sweet, but he doesn't really like dating. And so he's like super science driven. So he was like, why don't I just create this app myself where I can get a scientifically matched match for me, so I know that we'll be compatible. So then he creates the app, and Jess and her friend Fizzy, who is getting her own book that is releasing very soon. But anyway, Jess and her friend Fizzy like sign up and like do like their DNA swab or whatever for like kind of like as a joke, just to see like if it would even work. And then Jess gets her results back, and she has a 98% match with River. And so of course he like brings them in for a meeting and talks to her about it, and he like gives her this proposition where it's like, if you like pretend to be my girlfriend, and it's like, and we can like pose as like the perfect match because they're literally 98% match. He like paid her like a ton of money for it, and she was like a struggling mom, and so she agrees to it. So the whole thing, they're like fake dating, and they honestly, it just is so good, and I just think about it all the time. And I never see anyone post about this book, or not never, but I rarely see people post about this book, and it is just so good, and they get along so well. And River is very, 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 very underrated, and Jess is hilarious, and I love her. Also, her daughter is adorable. But this book is so good. If you really need like a good fake dating book, this one needs to be your next one. It's so good. Now, for our next trope, we have the marriage of convenience trope, which is one of my favorites ever. And so for this one, we have The Wall of Winnipeg and Me. This is like a big book. It's intimidating. It's a slow burn. It's long, but it is good. Okay, so it starts off with Vanessa being Aiden's assistant. Aiden's in like the NFL. He's like super famous, and he is like he just like ignores her, and she's always trying to be like super nice to him and like saying good morning and like have a good day, like how was your games, like she's always like kind of there for him, and he just ignores her, and it's just like, why? But anyway, she gets like super fed up with how he like talks to her and how he ignores her, and so then she quits. And then literally 2 days later, he shows up at her door and offers her money if she will marry him. And she's like, why would I do that when you are literally a jerk to me? And then he says that his visa is expiring in a year, and so he needs to marry her in order to like keep it or get a new one or whatever. And so then she agrees, and they get married. And the whole time it just is like, this also is like a grumpy sunshine, of course, because he's so rude to her. But then it's really just because he has no idea how to express his feelings. But this is not a grumpy sunshine trope recommendation. This is a marriage of convenience recommendation. It is so good. If you're looking for a book that has like a don't touch my wife scene, this is the one, because this one is so good. And I promise you, it is so worth to read this 600 plus page book for that scene. It is so good, and you need to read this one if you haven't, especially if you want a good marriage of convenience trope. This is it. Wall of Winnipeg and Me. This is it. Next, we have our small town recommendation. I just read this book, I think about 2 months ago, And if you follow me on my Bookstagram, you know that this is my literal new obsession, and I will recommend it to everybody. Indigo Ridge. I talked about this in my first video, and I am still thinking about this book. If you want a good small town romance, this is the one, because this follows Griffin Eden and Winslow Covington, who is the new town sheriff, she's the new sheriff, and Griffin is like the town's, like, not golden boy, because he's like kind of grumpy, but anyway, his family is just like the founding family, so they've been there forever, so he's like famous in this town. But everybody knows him, everybody gets along, and there's a really good mystery murder subplot in this book. Their relationship is one of my favorite ones ever. His family, like the small town relationships they have with everyone there, is so good. And I love how at the end of this book we see a like sneak peek into the next book, which is also in this video, but I will get to that in a minute. But this is one of the best small town romances I have ever read, I think, in my entire life. It is so good. And if you want one that's like, it's literally going to get your attention from the very first line, this is the one. I couldn't put it down, and I read it in a day and a half. And then I picked up the next book, and I read that one in a day and a half. They're so good. And everyone that reads this book, I literally haven't heard a single bad thing about this book. It's so good, and it's like the perfect small town romance. So you need to add this, Indigo Ridge. You need to add this to your TBR. You need to read it. It's so good. Since I just did Indigo Ridge, I literally have to do Juniper Hill next. This is for the single parent trope, which I did not think I would enjoy as much as the other tropes, but this book completely changed it for me. This also has like a little bit of some, like, I can't speak. This has a little bit of small town romance in it. It has a little bit of a mystery. Like, it's so good. And seeing Memphis, and Drake is her son's name, seeing their relationship, Drake is adorable. I think he's like 1 year old. But Memphis like loves him with everything in her, and it just is one of my favorite things to read about, is like parents' love for their kids. And then we have Knox over here, who's this like really miserable tattooed chef who wants nothing to do with Memphis and her son, but he has to have everything to do with them because they live in his guest house, and Drake has like a really hard time sleeping. And so one day Knox just gets like super fed up with it and goes over and starts helping her with the baby, and then you like slowly see him start to like relax around her and start to like form a bond with this baby. But there's like some other drama that happens that like makes it hard for him to connect, and you have to read it to find out what that is, because I will not spoil that for you. But it is so good, and if I could force anyone to read a book, it would be this one, because it's so good. And Knox and Drake and Memphis, like the three of them together, are adorable, and it just makes my heart melt. And I will read anything and everything that Devney Perry writes, and you should too. So, Juniper Hill, read it, please. Now, for Forbidden Romance, we have Twisted Games. Guys, this is literally I think my second favorite of the Twisted series. Twisted Lies is my favorite, but this is my second favorite. Reese and Bridget are, first of all, one of my favorite book couples ever. Bridget is a princess. It's kind of like, I literally said this in my first video, but it's Princess Diaries on steroids. That's what this is. So Bridget is a princess, and she has this bodyguard, Reese, and he's like sworn to protect her or whatever. And he has this like motto that he's always going by, where he like will just not get personally involved with his clients, like not even ask them how their day was. Like, that's how closed off he is. But then he meets Bridget, and he is like obsessed with her, and he cannot help it. And he even like, she had to get married, or she was supposed to get married, and then she was supposed to get married, and she was like talking to this duke that was like a suitor or whatever, and Reese like pretended there was like honestly, I forget what it was that he was pretending, but he pretended something was happening, like, to get her out of there, and then he was literally talking about how he was going to cut off his hand because they were dancing, and it is so good. He is, like, the only Twisted, like, the Twisted series boys, like, he is the only one to do no wrong. He has no secrets, no lying, no anything. He is perfect. He, like, literally the best. They're the best book couple ever, and you have to read this book. You have to read this book because it is so good, and it's, like, one of the best forbidden romances I've ever read. You won't regret reading this. Up next, we have Grumpy Sunshine with Archer's voice. This book, like, emotionally scarred me. Let me start off with that. But Archer is mute and he cannot speak, and it just is, like, it really, it just makes me so sad to think about. But Bree comes into town and lives, like, a few houses down from him, and she's, like, super, super sweet, and everyone in town, like, immediately they just love her because she is so kind. And she runs into Archer at the grocery store, and they, like, bump into each other, and, like, one of them drops their groceries, and so, like, they're helping each other pick it up, and she's like, thank you, and he doesn't say anything, and she doesn't know him, so she's, like, immediately thinking, wow, he's so rude. And then later on in the book, she finds out that he is mute, and so she starts to, like, try and form a relationship with him because her dad was deaf, and so she knew sign language, and she, like, starts signing to him, and he's like, why are you talking to me? Like, leave me alone. Because he is, like, super, super isolated, and that is also another really sad thing about this book, is he, like, does not talk to anybody. Nobody in town talks to him. And they all just, like, think of him. They're all so mean to him. And it just literally makes me so sad. I cried so much. I think I cried probably throughout this entire book. But she, like, starts signing to him, and they, like, slowly start forming a relationship, but he's still super, super closed off and just, like, does not want to interact with her. And there's a few times where he literally just, like, ignores her completely when she's there, and then she'll leave. And then we also get, like, his point of view, and we'll see how, like, she leaves and he's like, I want her to come back. And there's one scene where he's like, she was running from him because something happens, and so she's running from him, and he starts, like, he, like, chases after her, and he can't speak, so he, like, can't sign to her because she's turned away from him. He can't sign to her to, like, stop running, and so he finally catches up to her, and then he signs to her. He's like, please don't run from me, I can't call to you. And that part literally made me cry. So I love this book for Grumpy Sunshine solely because we see his development go from, like, being, like, this super isolated, super quiet, very grumpy man to meeting this sunshine girl who changes his life forever. And it is so good. And it's kind of this is a standalone. I mean, there's a sequel about one of the characters in this. I hate him in this book, but you don't need to read anything else to read this book, and please read it. Archer's voice, so good. Now we have Second Chance, and also Friends to Lovers, Childhood Friends to Lovers, Final Offer. This is the last book in the Dreamland Billionaire series, so you do need to read the other two in order to read this book. But oh my gosh, I finished this a few days ago, and I cried a lot. One, because this was an amazing book. Two, because it was the end of the series, and I was, like, wicked sad. But this one is so good. I wish that we had seen, like, more flashbacks to Cal and Alana, like, when they were kids. But this was, like, oh, it's so good. And seeing their development from, like her learning to trust him again, and him coming over, like, his addictions, and just seeing their development overall, it was so amazing. And I loved seeing how they were just they couldn't stay away from each other. Like, every time they're together, there's, like, this pull, and they just, like, have to be together. And her daughter, she's also a single mom, and seeing Cal's relationship with her daughter, Cammie, like, start to form was so sweet, and I loved it so much. And this is just, it was so good. It's a big one also, but worth every page. Final Offer, Dreamland Billionaires, Lauren Asher. Always recommend those. If you know me at all, I will always recommend those. But this one is the best second chance romance I think I've ever read. So, add this one to your never-ending TBR and read it. Now we have the Brother's Best Friend book trope with Twisted Love. This one is like the best Brother's Best Friend romance. Why did it do that to me? Okay. This one is the best Brother's Best Friend romance I have ever read in my entire life. Her brother, I almost forgot his name. Her brother Josh like has to leave town, and he's like super protective of Ava, so he asks his best friend Alex to like kind of watch over her, and they're neighbors, right? Okay. And so Alex lives next door while Josh is gone, and she is like determined to like make him like her, not like in a romantic way, but she like doesn't like when people don't like her and doesn't like when people are grumpy, because he's also wicked grumpy, and she is very much a sunshine. So she's like determined to like make him like her, and so she starts like bringing him cookies and like all this other stuff, and he is very much obsessed with her. If you want a Brother's Best Friend, boy obsessed, grumpy sunshine, this one is so good. Like, I'm literally obsessed with this book, and I'm gonna reread it again soon. I read it in one day, literally one day. It's like about 300 pages ish, but their whole relationship is like one of my favorites. There's a lot of groveling. This is, it just is so good, and he would literally kill for her. I don't know if I can say that on YouTube, but he would do anything for her. But this is one of the best Brother's Best Friend romances I've ever read, and if you haven't read it yet, you really should, because it's really good. Now, we have workplace romance with, again, a Lauren Asher book. We have Wrecked. This is the third book in her Dirty Air series, which is a F1 sports romance. All the books are F1 like driving. But this one specifically is a workplace romance. This follows along with Jax and Elena, and Jax is this like British race car driver who like severely needs like some what's the word, like, so Jax needs help with like his internet image, like the paparazzi, all his social stuff, and so in comes Elena, who needs financial stability because her childhood was absolutely traumatizing, and so she like needs to be able to find a job that will like be able to provide for her or whatever. And so she becomes his like almost kind of like assistant. She is his assistant. And at first she does not like him at all, and he doesn't really like her, to be honest, because he just doesn't want anybody in his business. And so she like kind of just doesn't want to deal with him, but then she discovers that there's so much more to him than him being like grumpy and rude and all this other stuff, and she realizes it's because he's like dealing with a lot of like mental health and addictions, which the way she handles, like Lauren Asher, the author, the way she writes about men's mental health is one of my favorite things ever. And so if you are also looking for amazing representation with that, this is the one. But then they just like start to form this like amazing relationship, and I love seeing Jax like overcome his addictions and being willing to like talk about like what he's dealing with, and I love watching Elena like be there for him and support him through all of it, and it just is so good. This is my favorite book along with Redeemed of this series. So Wrecked by Lauren Asher, third book in the Dirty Air series. Read them. Read this one, please. It's so good. And now for the last one, we have a forced proximity but also a reverse Grumpy Sunshine, because I just have to include that with this book. And if you follow me on my Bookstagram, you guys know that this is also one of my absolute favorite books ever. So here we go. Icebreaker. This one is so good. This is a forced proximity, reverse Grumpy Sunshine, sports romance, literally all the best tropes in one book, but forced proximity is the most important one for this video. They are Nathan Hawkins and Anastasia Allen, obviously figure skater, hockey player. They are at I think it's Maple Hill. They're at the Maple Hills College, and they have 2 ice rinks at this point in time. And then all of a sudden, one of the groups pranks the other and causes the ice rink to melt, and then it's like totally broken. So they have to share the rink. And this is like a nightmare for Anastasia because she's a figure skater. She's been working for this like one routine for a long time, and she is constantly getting interrupted by these annoying hockey players that she cannot stand. And one of them, Nathan Hawkins, loves to mess with her because he's kind of like a golden retriever. So, I mean, that's why it's reverse Grumpy Sunshine also. But anyway, he loves to mess with her, and she's like super annoyed with him. And then all of a sudden, like, there's some drama that happens, but then her skating partner Aaron gets injured. Thank goodness. I hate Aaron in this book. You will hate him as well. He's a terrible character. So then Nathan decides to step in as her new partner, and she is like, absolutely not. I would rather do it by myself. And her skating instructor is like, you can't do it by yourself. So she has to do it with him. And so they have to do all their practices together. They have to share the rink together. They have to like go through all of the like the fitness stuff that she has to do outside of figure skating together. So they're just together all the time. And so of course they fall for each other, and it just is so good. This is one of my favorite books ever in the entire world. Anastasia is super relatable. I find her very relatable. Nathan Hawkins is wonderful. Them together, they are wonderful, and I love this book. I love their story. I love their relationships, and this also has like found family. Because it's the gift that keeps on giving. It has found family. All the characters in this book you will immediately grow attached to, and I'm very excited for you all to read this book because you need to read this book. And I'm so excited for the sequel, Wildfire, that's coming out October 3rd, which I've already bought because I know it's gonna be good. But this book is amazing, and you literally all have to read it for my sake, please. Alright, so that is all for today's video. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed all the recs, all of the tropes, and I hope you maybe were able to find something that you haven't read yet and you see it and you're like, oh, that sounds good, I'm gonna read it. If you did, please let me know in the comments and my DMs on Instagram. But anyway, thank you for watching. For more frequent posts, follow me on my Bookstagram. But yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next video.